Beach, 911.
My heart just dropped because I knew something had happened. It's absolutely horrific.
The closed circuit TV was instrumental in the investigation. I'm hoping and praying that we see who gets out of the vehicle.
All the video evidence connected the pieces together.
I was watching them clean up the homicide scene.
Who is she? Who is this person? We have no idea who she is.
I'm going to find out who this little boy's mom is. And you're the one that can make it happen right now.
"33-year-old Jolene Cummings is working her shift at Tangle's Hair Salon.
Jolene was a people person. She wanted to make everyone feel special.
How you doing? This is gonna look amazing on you.
She was always good at hair, and she was the top of her class in the updos, and she really loved it, and I was often her guinea pig. I just knew that whatever Jolene would do, she'd be good at, and she definitely was. Her children were the most important thing to her. The boys' daddy would get them on the weekend, but her weekend was working on a Saturday and then getting the boys back on a Sunday afternoon. The kids were the love of her life above anything else.
Yes, that one there, that's my youngest. He just turned 2. My heart.
2018 would have been the first year that she would be able to celebrate Mother's Day on her birthday with her 3 kids.
When is that gonna happen again? Crazy, right?
The kids and I had baked a cake, and yeah, it was supposed to be the best of all days.
I'm off. Good night. Have a good weekend. See you on Tuesday.
Have a good weekend.
Fernandina Beach, 911.
On the morning of May 14th, 2018, Ann Johnson called and reported her daughter, Jolene Cummings, missing. She stated that she had not seen her since Saturday, May 12th.
That Sunday, her daughter tried calling her mother, and she wasn't answering, and then I tried, and there wasn't an answer. And by that time, the boy's daddy, Jason, had came to my house and said Jolene never showed up. And it's like, my heart just dropped. My heart dropped. Because I knew something had happened. Nothing would keep Jolene from coming to the house to be with her children on Mother's Day.
There was an estranged husband, Jason Cummings. Anytime in a missing persons case, when there's an estranged spouse, they are going to be a person of interest. They are going to be someone that you want to talk to.
Hi, Jason Cummings. This is Detective Sergeant Harrington. I need to talk to you about Jolene.
He agreed to come down and meet with me at the sheriff's office the next day.
Thanks.
Investigators head to Tangle's Hair Salon to trace Jolene's last movements.
I spoke to the manager and owner of Tangle's Hair Salon, who did confirm that Jolene had worked on Saturday, May the 12th, and that she'd worked until approximately 5 p.m. And there was one other hairdresser in the salon that was scheduled to work that day. Her name was Jennifer Seibert.
We've got a hold of Jennifer Seibert on the phone.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Detective Harrington from the sheriff's office.
She said when she left the salon, Jolene left, that's the last time she had seen her.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
On the day that Jolene was reported missing, we did create a missing persons flyer. The flyer included a photograph of Jolene and included a photograph of her vehicle as well as a tag number for her vehicle. As I was looking through law enforcement databases for any previous reports concerning Jolene, the only report I discovered was a domestic dispute between Jolene and her current boyfriend, Jason G.
Take a look at this.
The report that I located indicated that just a few days before Jolene had last been seen, Jolene had called the police because she and her boyfriend, Jason, had been in an altercation. By the time patrol deputies arrived, he had fled the home and was no longer there.
It kind of raises a lot of red flags. We definitely want to follow up on this individual and see if they had another altercation.
Try calling him.
Hi, I'm a detective with the Sheriff's Department.
Once the detective identified themselves, the call was terminated, and any efforts to call back rang, and then it seemed to be turned off.
I can't get a hold of him.
Let's go find him.
Jason G. may be the person responsible for Jolene being missing.
Nobody seemed to know where he was at.
It became very urgent for me to find his location, and I got a warrant to ping his cell phone in attempts to try to find out where it was.
While investigators are waiting for the cell phone trace, they receive news of a sighting of Jolene's vehicle.
This is Harrington.
Someone thought they had seen Jolene's vehicle in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Yulee, Florida, which is just outside of Fernandina Beach.
And you're sure it's her vehicle?
They had noted the tag number, and it was the same tag number listed in the missing persons BOLA.
Thanks. We've got Jolene's car.
I was extremely excited. I immediately left my office with detectives from the crime scene unit and went to the Home Depot parking lot. All the doors were locked except for the driver's door, which was unlocked.
There was no keys in the vehicle. That would lead you to believe that someone left in a hurry and just didn't lock the vehicle.
Nothing.
I'll get it taken to be searched. I'm gonna need a vehicle towed.
After taking a look at Jolene's vehicle, the next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to do a canvass around the area for any type of video surveillance. It was very disappointing because business after business was checked, and it just seemed like none of the cameras covered the area where Jolene's vehicle was. It may not have been until the next day that we actually discovered a bank that had some video surveillance.
It had a security camera facing out one of the entrance roads coming into the shopping center area.
Detectives head to the bank to review the footage from its security cameras.
It started early evening.
We knew from our investigation thus far that Jolene had worked until approximately 5 p.m. on May 12th. So we started viewing the camera at approximately that time.
Stop.
I'm watching the back video at around 1 o'clock.
Eventually, bam, we see something that looks like Jolene's vehicle.
So I was like, that's it. That's Jolene's Ford being driven into the parking lot.
The CCTV footage captures Jolene's vehicle 8 hours after she was last seen at Tangle's Hair Salon.
It was a very exciting moment, and we knew that, you know, maybe this is going to be a big break.
Play that bit again.
And you could see Jolene's vehicle entering the parking lot area, but it drove into frame and out of frame. Didn't actually show the vehicle being parked.
Do you have any other cameras?
I'm hoping and praying that there's another camera angle that shows the vehicle being parked and who gets out of the vehicle.
It started at the same time? That's her vehicle.
The vehicle pulls into a parking space facing east.
There was a couple of trees that blocked part of the view, so it wasn't clear.
Sits there a little while, then an individual gets out of that vehicle.
Stop it there. Play that again.
It appears that they're dressed in all dark clothing.
Punch it.
Jolene?
But it's impossible to identify who that person is just because of the distance between the camera and the area where the vehicle was parked. It was frustrating.
Thanks for your time.
While deputies hunt for footage to identify the mystery person, Detective Harrington returns to the sheriff's office to interview Jolene's estranged husband.
Jason Cummings showed up at the sheriff's office as agreed on time.
Jolene's missing. Okay, she hadn't been seen since she left work.
We had known that Jason Cummings had picked up the kids from Jolene. He was supposed to bring them back on Mother's Day, which would be Sunday.
So I wait there, and about 6:20, 6:25, I text Jolene and said, look, you're late. Said I'll be here in 20 minutes. Then I went to her mom's house to see if she was over there, see what was going on. And that's when I found out they'd been trying to get a hold of her all day, and nobody's talked to her.
He said the last time he had seen Jolene was the day that he picked the kids up.
He stated that during the weekend of the 12th through the 13th of May that he was with their kids.
They played outside pretty much all day in pool.
Detectives were able to verify Jason Cummings' alibi.
If you need to search anything, I got my car out here, you're more welcome.
The search of Jason Cummings' cell phone and vehicle didn't reveal anything of a suspicious nature.
I appreciate you coming in, and I appreciate you letting me take a look at your vehicle. I appreciate your cooperation.
At that time, he was pretty much eliminated as a suspect.
Meantime, investigators trace Jolene's missing boyfriend, Jason G., to a house in Hilliard near Jacksonville. Deputies bring him to the sheriff's office for questioning.
We want to know, when we interview him, why he was running from us, trying to avoid us.
I got a warrant for violation of probation. I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't have nothing to do with Jolene.
He kept saying he had no involvement in her disappearance.
I just found out about Jolene being missing yesterday at 3 o'clock. My aunt come and told me. I don't know if she's happened, but I love her. I honestly love her.
He told us where he was during the time of Jolene's disappearance. We went and interviewed Jason G's friends, who said that he was at a barbecue and nothing seemed out of the ordinary.
We were able to determine that he was at some friend's house in Jacksonville and had spent the whole weekend there.
So we can eliminate him from being a part of this, and we can continue on investigating the disappearance.
Investigators charged Jason G. with no crimes in relation to Jolene's disappearance. or their domestic dispute. On the other side of town, Jolene's mom, Anne, searches for her daughter.
Jolene! I didn't want to interfere with the investigation, but I spent days and days walking, even areas that we probably weren't supposed to.
Jolene!
When a mother's on a mission, you're totally focused on finding your loved one. I never stopped searching. The friends and the people that did help were phenomenal. I mean, they just went out on their own looking for Jolene.
Have you heard anything? Can you please let me know if you hear anything?
Having a loved one disappear and not knowing is the most heart-wrenching thing that you can go through. Just felt totally helpless.
Jolene! Jolene!
Investigators returned to Tangle's hair salon to search for clues that might explain Jolene's disappearance.
On the 15th of May, we went to Tangle's hair salon to take a look at the salon and to talk to the manager.
Just have a couple more questions for you.
The salon closed late Saturday afternoon and opened back up on Tuesday at 10 a.m.
Do you have any security cameras in here?
There were cameras inside the salon, but they were dummy cameras.
It doesn't work. It's just for show.
It was very disappointing.
Thanks. If you think of anything or hear from Jolene, let us know. Of course.
Investigators searched nearby businesses for CCTV cameras.
My hope was the security cameras at the strip mall where Tangles was located might show Jolene leaving after work on Saturday. It may show who she left with, if anybody. It may confirm that she left in her vehicle or if something happened to her in the parking lot. When we were told that the cameras at the strip mall didn't work, it was discouraging, but there's nothing you can do but to move on with the investigation.
But deputies do secure footage from a gas station close to the Home Depot where Jolene's car was found.
My hope was that if the person who exited Jolene's vehicle either went to the gas station or even walked through the parking lot, that I would have a pretty good view of who that person may be. When we reviewed the video, we knew we needed to start around 1 o'clock because we had seen Jolene's vehicle arrive at 1:17 a.m.
At that point, we would possibly be able to identify the person that left Jolene's vehicle in the parking lot.
It's at 1:19 a.m., 2 minutes after Jolene's vehicle was parked, that we see someone dressed in all black walk into the Gate gas station. There was no doubt in my mind that, the person I seen walking into the store was the same person that exited Jolene's vehicle.
We see a female wearing all black with her hair pulled back into a bun. She seems a little antsy, as if something is the matter, where the other customers are either checking out or going through the aisles shopping.
She just looked out of place.
Who is it? Punch it in.
I was able to see her purchase a bottle of water. I could also see what looked like injuries to her face, specifically what looked like a scratch under one of her eyes.
Print out that image.
We did take still photographs from the video surveillance, and we showed them to the manager of Tangle's hair salon.
We just have a few more questions.
Okay.
Do you know her?
That's Jennifer.
She was immediately able to identify it as Jennifer Seibert.
Jennifer is Jolene's co-worker at Tangle's Hair Salon.
She was the last person on the schedule with Jolene Cummings.
What can you tell us about her?
Jennifer Seibert had only been employed at the salon for a couple of months, and that initially Jennifer and Jolene seemed to get along very well. But as time went by, there was increased tension between the two, to the point that there had recently been some flare-ups and some arguments. The manager was also able to confirm that when she had seen Jennifer Seibert the previous weekend, that she described her face as flawless, that she did not have any scratches on her face. She told the manager that she quit and she would mail her key to the salon.
We went to find Jennifer Seibert and question her about that day.
Do you have an address for her?
Yeah. Here. Thanks.
I went to the location that Jennifer had provided on her application for employment, where she stated that she lived with her mother in Fernandina Beach. I determined that address doesn't even exist. It was all false. I knew I had to track her down. I knew that I needed to start pinging her phone.
While investigators wait for a fix on Jennifer's phone, a forensics team examines Tangles for clues that might reveal what happened to Jolene.
It looked like a normal hair salon. But as the crime scene unit took a closer look, they started to notice little things. They noticed a desk drawer over by the cash register, that the front of it was damaged.
Looking a little closer, they noticed that one of the schedule appointment books had a couple tiny specks of what appeared to be possibly a blood stain.
We started seeing more and more blood droplets. Eventually, we used what they call luminol. If there's been any type of blood on the floor that had been cleaned up, luminol will actually bring it to light. The salon just lit up like a Christmas tree. It was shocking to see the amount of blood that had been in that salon.
It was on the floor and the wall. It had mop imprints where it was clear that somebody had cleaned up blood.
Something bad happened in that salon.
It was very obvious to me that there had been one hell of a fight, probably, or struggle inside that salon, and that there had been a extensive effort for somebody to clean it up and conceal it. I knew at that time that I was no longer working a missing persons case. The thing that hit me hardest was I knew I was going to have to tell Jolene's family that I suspected that she was dead.
She was taken by the hands of another. Having to find out, the gory details. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Left a deep hole. Without Jolene, it's a hole. It's a black hole.
We knew that Jennifer Seibert owned a black Kia Soul. We suspected that she may be living out of her vehicle. So we started searching all of Northeast Florida. We sent detectives to search truck stops, rest areas.
When I'm driving down Interstate 95 South, I'm looking if there's any vehicle on the side of the road, and I was aware that there was a rest area. When I pulled in and happened to see a small black Kia Soul parked between, I believe it was two semis, I couldn't tell if there's anybody in the vehicle. We know there's some kind of foul play, so it wouldn't be safe to approach a vehicle by yourself in this type of situation.
I found you.
Detective Rose made contact with me via phone, and myself and several other detectives went to that location. As myself and the other detectives approached the vehicle, I could tell that the vehicle was running. It appeared that somebody was sleeping in the back hatchback area. I don't have any idea if this person is armed with a gun or a knife or anything else.
Sheriff's office!
And I asked the person that is inside the vehicle to exit the vehicle.
Get out of the vehicle! Slowly! Show me your hands!
As the person climbs from the back towards the driver's side door of the vehicle, I can tell that it is Jennifer Seibert. Not only does she have multiple injuries to her face, but she has went to some extent to try to cover them up with makeup and some bandages.
My name is Detective Harrington. Have you seen Jolene lately?
No, I hardly know her.
I tell her that I'm investigating Jolene Cummings' disappearance.
Have you ever been in her vehicle?
No.
She immediately replied no, which at that point I knew that she was being untruthful. At this time, I do not have enough probable cause to arrest her for homicide, but I probably got enough to charge her with grand theft auto because I knew that she had driven Jolene's vehicle into the Home Depot parking lot.
That allowed us to hold her until we could continue investigation, continue to gather evidence, trying to tie her to Jolene's disappearance.
Yeah, we're gonna need a tow truck.
I did request that the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office tow her vehicle to their facility and preserve it for later forensic examination. She was placed in the back of a vehicle and transported to the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office.
Feels hurting you?
No, they feel great. You can put them on tighter if you want. Whatever you want to do. I'm not at your mercy, so have as much fun as you'd like.
Okay, what you're gonna have to do is just stand up and bend over.
You seem very calm, very flippant.
When she was asked where the wounds to her face came from, she stated that she was riding her bike and that she had ran into a tree limb, causing the injuries to her face. She loved to talk about herself, but specifics of the Jolene Cummings case, she knew that to avoid that. She knew when it was time to talk and when not to talk. I discovered that there was a deputy in St. Johns County that had known Jennifer Seibert several years ago. He had met Jennifer through mutual like for motorcycles. He stated that she would normally have a storage facility where she kept that motorcycle.
We ended up getting pretty much a list of any storage unit that we had local in Nassau County. And we all just started checking out all the storage units to see if she was one of the renters there.
We were able to locate a storage unit on Sadler Road in Fernandina Beach. Inside the storage unit, we located some cleaning materials. There were wigs. There was also a pair of black military-style combat boots that appeared to be similar to the ones that was shown in the Gate gas station surveillance. So I was like, man, this is important. We need to have these boots processed and see if there's any type of blood or DNA evidence on these items.
Investigators returned to Tangles to interview a staff member about Jolene's working relationship with Jennifer.
Her name was Ann Morgan, and she described Jennifer and Jolene's relationship as good at first, but then towards the end, very, very confrontational. She went into detail about an incident that happened in which Jolene was trying to talk to her about Jennifer.
About 2 weeks before she missing, she told me something about Jennifer that I cannot put my hand on it. She not right. She fake, Miss Ann. She fake something about her that I don't trust.
Ann stated that Jennifer seemed very intent on trying to eavesdrop on this conversation.
Jolene look up to her, say, go away. I don't want to talk to you. You crazy, you fake.
Jolene had actually told her, I want to look into this Jennifer Seibert. I want to do some background checks because I don't think she is who she says she is. It started my mind thinking, is that my motive? Is that my motive for the crime? When I started trying to look into Jennifer Seibert's criminal history, there was nothing there that stood out. But if anything stood out, it was the fact that there was very little background there at all.
I started searching for Jennifer Seibert, and the search came back to a 13-year-old little girl who had been killed in Germany, but buried in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Hi there. This is Detective Rose from the Nassau County Sheriff's Office in Florida. I'm sorry to have to ask you this.
We contacted the father of Jennifer Seibert, who confirmed that his daughter had passed away in an accident in Germany. We also sent him a picture of who is claiming to be Jennifer Seibert, and he confirmed that he did not know who that person was. Who is she? Who is this person? And we have no idea who she is.
We went into an interview room, and the first thing that I asked her, do you want me to call you Jennifer Seibert?
When you run my fingerprints through, they come up as Kimberly Lee Kessler. I've been running from the FBI for over 25 years. I've been living under this particular alias since 1999, and that's about it.
After she had explained to me that her real name was Kimberly Kessler, she gave me several aliases that she had lived under, the different jobs that she had worked, from exotic dancer to truck driver. She explained that she had previously been in a relationship with a guy who was a serial bank robber, and that she thought that the FBI may be in search of her in reference to that.
So I met him at a topless bar, and just started going out with him and whatever, and he was with me. He called somebody and they said, the FBI is looking for you. So I'm like, you what? And I hid him in my apartment, and that was like kind of almost the beginning.
As we researched the information that was provided during the interview, we were able to determine that most of it was factual, but there was no evidence that we could determine that the FBI was ever looking for her. She was very calm, very composed, but I also noticed that anytime I approached the subject of Jolene, that she was quick to shut down.
Something happened to Jolene, and we actually sent our crime scene unit out to process Tangles. And there was some evidence there, okay? And I know that she said some negative things to you that day. She said that she thought you were fake and she was gonna look you up.
I don't remember any of that.
That's what I was told. I think Jolene's dead, and I think you know where Jolene is, and I'm gonna find out where the little boy's mama is. I promise you I'm gonna do that. You can help me do that. And you're the one that can make it happen right now.
No, I cannot.
When I tried to really kind of approach her in an aggressive manner, she never flinched and lost her cool or lost her composure.
Let me reply it this way, and you may not like the answer. I would like legal counsel.
Do you not want to talk to me without legal counsel? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, sir.
After she invoked her right to an attorney, I knew it was time to continue working with the evidence that we had.
Investigators analyzed the objects recovered from Kimberly Kessler's car.
We did find inside her vehicle a salon kit with a pair of scissors in there, and they looked to be some type of red stain in the screw part of the scissors. Certainly taking that to the lab to be tested.
We found a receipt that showed a purchase at the Walmart in Fernandina Beach. It was on the same day that Jolene apparently went missing. We were able to obtain video surveillance that showed that it was Kimberly Kessler purchasing the items at 8:57 p.m.
Is there a closer angle?
Yes, there is.
The purchases included a bottle of ammonia, trash bags, but probably the most chilling item that was bought was a large electric fillet knife. I knew that not only had Jolene been murdered, but she had likely been dismembered.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, I could not think of anybody would even think of doing something like this. How could somebody do that?
Investigators returned to Tangles to search for clues about the location of Jolene's body.
The wooded area behind Tangles, I observed a blue bin, and it kind of stood out because it appeared to be the exact type of blue bins that were in Kimberly Kessler's storage unit when we executed that search warrant. I asked that the bin be collected and analyzed for any type of DNA or blood evidence.
There's a restaurant located next door. So I went and I said, hey, do y'all have any video surveillance?
Can you take it back to the night of the 12th?
This camera shows the back of the business, and right next door to that is Tangles Salon.
That's Kimberly.
I knew it was huge when we saw this surveillance video. Shortly after closing time, we could see Kimberly Kessler carrying heavy trash bags out to the dumpster behind the facility.
Punch in there.
Approximately 4 hours after, at 12:14 a.m., we also saw her carry the blue bin that was found in the wood line out and dump the contents out into the ground in the woods. I had no doubt in my mind that, I was watching her clean up the homicide scene.
I thought with everything else that we have, we got her. We got her in action doing something with foul play. There's something bad going on here.
When the garbage truck comes and empties the dumpster, it was just kind of heartbreaking because I realized that, not only evidence was going to the landfill, it was possible that at least parts of Jolene were going to the landfill.
A search of the landfill reveals no sign of Jolene's remains.
We had pinpointed the area where we thought they were dumped. We searched for a week, but we just couldn't find anything.
On May 30th, 2018, we received a large amount of results of the items that we had sent for analysis. The boots recovered from the storage unit had Jolene's Cummings blood on it. The substance found on the screw of the scissors did come back as Jolene Cummings blood.
We believe right then that that was the murder weapon.
A forensic analysis located a partial fingernail in the blue bin and confirmed that it was Jolene Cummings' fingernail.
Eventually, we gathered enough evidence to charge Kimberly Kessler with the murder of Jolene.
Kimberly Kessler's trial begins on December 6, 2021. She pleads not guilty. Prosecutors step through the events that led to Jolene's murder.
Kessler, we believe, was afraid that Jolene was going to find out who she really was. She knew that they both worked on Saturday. When the salon closed, there was a big fight, and Jolene lost her life. Kessler tried to destroy all the evidence and clean up the salon. She wants to get rid of Jolene's vehicle because it would be suspicious it was still in the parking lot. She thought she could get away with it.
The jury come back and found Kimberly Kessler guilty of first-degree murder and grand theft auto. The judge sentenced Kimberly Kessler to life in prison without the possibility for parole. I was happy that justice had been served. On the other hand, I was disappointed that I was not able to find Jolene and return her to her family. The closed-circuit TV was instrumental. I don't think we would have been able to make this case without the surveillance video.
The investigation reveals that Kimberly Kessler lived in multiple locations across the United States, and that Jennifer Seibert is just one of a number of fake names that she used.
Between 1996 and the time she was arrested in 2018, Kimberly Kessler had lived in at least 33 different cities. She had used at least 18 different aliases.
Investigators believe the length of time Kessler spent on the run and the number of aliases she adopted indicate that Jolene might not be her only victim.
I absolutely believe there's more people out there. I absolutely believe that. There's somebody out there that if they have a missing loved one and you hear of the alias names or the cities, if we could help just one other family, give them some answers. That's really important to me because at this point I can't bring Jolene back, but maybe we could help someone else out.
To date, prosecutors have charged Kimberly Kessler with no other killings.
After the sentencing, I shut down. It was my time to grieve, and I'm still shut down. I'm still grieving. If I could talk to Jolene today, I would tell her how much I love her. I'd just tell her how proud I am of her. The only thing that we have of Jolene is her fingernail. Her remains have not been found. There's only one person that can answer that.
The wind screaming off Lake Michigan in the pitch-black freezing winter of 1991 did not just freeze the concrete architecture of Chicago. It became a howling accomplice to an execution that would paralyze the state's political landscape for over 3 decades. It was a time of smoke-filled backrooms, unchecked municipal corruption, and shifting back-alley alliances, but the fragile peace of the city fractured completely on the night of October 24th, 1991, when 24-year-old investigative journalist Evelyn Cross vanished from the neon-lit grid of the Loop. She was not a casual traveler. She did not live a double life, and her sedan remained idling curbside outside the downtown offices of the Chicago Chronicle, its driver's side door flung wide open, its radio static buzzing through the freezing midnight air, and her leather notebook, filled with explosive, unreleased evidence regarding institutional money laundering, scattered across the wet asphalt. For 35 agonizing years, this structural mystery remained a terrifying ghost, an unyielding trauma filed away in the deepest vaults of the Cook County Homicide Division under the heavy, frustrating label of a permanent cold case. Generations of veteran TAM, too, broke their careers against the complete absence of physical tracks. While the city grew upward, yellowed newspaper print faded into digital pixels, and the memory of the young reporter became a muted urban legend whispered only by aging newsroom veterans. But the dark gravity of a historic murder possesses an unyielding, predatory patience, and by the summer of 2026, the long-accepted silence surrounding the fate of Evelyn Cross did not just dissolve. It exploded with a devastating, localized force that shattered the highest echelons of Illinois state governance. The Chandong Resolution did not originate from a high-tech forensic breakthroughs or a sudden digital mapping array, but from the raw, terrifying vacuum of a dying man's conscience, as an emergency room deathbed confession tore away a 35-year mask of absolute righteousness, unmasking a prominent, beloved elder statesman of the Chicago political establishment not as a civic savior, but as a cold, calculating monster who had built his entire legendary career on top of an unmarked grave. The acute psychological terror that gripped the working-class neighborhoods of Chicago in the winter of 1991 established a baseline of collective anxiety that would poison municipal trust for an entire generation. Evelyn Cross was a brilliant, unyielding force within the independent press, a young woman whose investigative instinct had recently focused on a massive, illicit transit procurement scheme that connected corporate construction syndicates directly to the private bank accounts of the city's rising administrative elite. She was relentless, operating with a fearless, old-school grit that made her immensely dangerous to the hidden power brokers of Cook County. When her editor, alarmed by her failure to file a front-page exposé that was scheduled for the morning edition, dispatched a courier to her last known location, the system expected to find a minor traffic accident or a temporary logistics delay. Instead, the moment patrol units secured the perimeter outside the downtown office complex, they realized they were standing at the edge of a clean, state-sponsored extraction. The idling vehicle, the dropped keys, and the complete absence of skid marks or signs of an erratic struggle suggested a surgical ambush, an operation executed by individuals who understood the precise timing of local police patrols and the exact blind spots of the early millennial urban camera networks. The immediate tactical deployment by the Chicago Police Department was immense, frantic, and fundamentally paralyzed by an invisible, internal resistance that steered the investigative trajectory away from the true architects of the violence. Homicide detectives launched an aggressive sweep of the industrial shipping yards along the Chicago River, utilizing canine units to search the frozen marshlands of the outer subdistricts, while marine divisions deployed sonar grids into the murky, sub-zero currents of the lake, working against a ticking clock as the winter wind threatened to bury any residual physical evidence beneath sheets of dense ice. The media coverage was dawn-damp and suffocating, with daily television broadcasts flashing Evelyn's portrait across the state, begging the public for any sighting of a suspect vehicle or a suspicious nocturnal gathering along the waterfront. But the city remained stubbornly, chillingly silent. No eyewitnesses stepped forward from the downtown high-rises, no physical prints were recovered from the clean surfaces of her abandoned vehicle, and the early forensic sweeps yielded a completely sterile canvas, devoid of foreign biological material, clothing fibers, or tool marks. It was as if Evelyn Cross had simply ceased to exist at a molecular level, leaving behind a double void that devastated her working-class family and left the independent press corps drowning in deep-seated paranoia. As the years bled into decades, the investigation ground down into a structural, political stasis that turned the Cross file into a definitive symbol of institutional failure within the department. The total absence of a body, a weapon, or an identifiable crime scene created a permanent legal purgatory that completely froze the county prosecutor's office, They could not issue a grand jury indictment against a shadow, nor could they definitively rule out the counter-narrative aggressively pushed by City Hall that the young reporter had simply suffered a mental break and staged her own disappearance to escape the immense pressures of her career. Evelyn's mother spent 20 years navigating this weaponized ambiguity, maintaining a solitary vigil in her modest bungalow on the South Side, keeping her daughter's research desk exactly as it had been on that October night, her files arranged in neat rows waiting for an answer that the system seemed entirely incapable of providing. The file boxes were eventually transferred to the climate-controlled archives of the Cold Case Division, gathering dust while the city's political machinery marched on, transforming the corrupt young administrators of the 90s into the powerful, gray-haired statesmen of the modern era. The catalyst that would ultimately break this 35-year deadlock did not come from an incremental advancement in DNA profiling or a retroactive digital scan, but from the sudden, chaotic intervention of human mortality inside the intensive care unit of Northwestern Memorial Hospital in June 2026. An elderly man, gasping for breath beneath an oxygen mask as his internal organs succumbed to terminal cardiac failure, utilized his final reservoir of physical energy to demand the immediate presence of the state's attorney and a federal marshal. This was not a standard career criminal or an aging street-level operative seeking a last-minute deal. It was Thomas the Hammer McAllister, a retired, 84-year-old enforcement chief who had spent the late 20th century managing the private security details and covert operations for the city's elite political campaigns. As the high-definition police recording equipment was activated at his bedside, McAllister delivered a raw, gravelly monologue that dismantled 35 years of engineered history, a confession that did not merely crack the cold case open but tore the moral facade off the city's leadership, naming a legendary, currently serving state senator as the individual who had personally ordered, coordinated, and executed the permanent elimination of Evelyn Cross. The deathbed transmission delivered by Thomas McAllister inside the sterile, fluorescent intensity of the hospital wing acted as a tectonic detonation that instantly catalyzed a covert, midnight mobilization of federal tactical units across the state of Illinois. The recording, captured with absolute digital clarity, provided a cold, unyielding roadmap to a crime that had been protected for a generation by a wall of absolute political insulation. McAllister did not speak with the frantic terror of a man facing divine judgment. Instead, his voice retained the clinical, detached precision of an aging engineer explaining an old blueprint. He detailed how, on the night of October 24, 1991, he had received a direct encrypted command from the private residence of Alderman Julian Garrity, a man who would subsequently utilize his absolute control over the city's financial committees to ascend to the position of a powerful, untouchable state senator, a politician celebrated throughout the modern era as a champion of transparency and public integrity. The details of the extraction, as dictated by the dying enforcer, completely inverted the historical narrative of the case, exposing a level of calculated corporate malice that horrified the veteran detectives tasked with reviewing the file. McAllister confessed that Evelyn Cross had not been intercepted by a randomized predator or a loose network of political handlers. She had been targeted by a specialized, three-man tactical team that he had personally assembled at Garrity's explicit request. The team had utilized an unmarked municipal city utility van, parking it within the shadows of the Chicago Chronicle's loading bay, waiting with absolute patience for the exact 5-minute window when the private security guard shifted locations to complete his basement rounds, a scheduling detail that Garrity had quietly extracted from the city's building management files. The moment Evelyn walked out of the rear glass doors of the office complex, her leather notebook tucked beneath her arm, she was stepped into a coordinated trap. McAllister described how two operatives moved from the shadows of the utility van, intercepting her before she could turn the key in her sedan's ignition. There was no loud commotion, no protracted struggle that would draw the attention of late-night office workers. One operative utilized a specialized, medical-grade chemical restraint to induce instantaneous vocal paralysis and physical incapacitation, while the second individual caught her slumping frame, lifting her directly into the rear sliding doors of the utility van. The entire operation was completed in less than 48 seconds, a clean, silent erasure executed while the neon signs of the loop blinked indifferently against the falling snow, leaving her vehicle idling curbside as a permanent, terrifying misdirection for the local police precinct. The trajectory of the utility van during the subsequent hours of that October night was a calculated journey through the industrial belly of the city, a path specifically designed to bypass the primary arterial roads where early police checkpoints might be established. McAllister confessed that the destination was not a remote woodland or a deep-water dock, but an active, massive commercial construction site on the city's west side, a multi-million-pound municipal stadium project that was entirely controlled by a development syndicate that functioned as the primary corporate financial donor to Julian Garrity's political campaign. The site was completely locked down for the night, its towering cranes and vast fields of excavated earth standing silent beneath the freezing sky, a private kingdom of steel and concrete where the rules of the outside world ceased to apply. The execution of Evelyn Cross, carried out inside the subterranean foundation levels of the uncompleted stadium complex, was a moment of supreme, sociopathic coldness that McAllister described with a chilling, technical fluency. He stated that Alderman Julian Garrity did not remain insulated in his luxury penthouse while his handlers did the dirty work. Instead, the young politician had arrived at the construction site in a private vehicle, his face obscured by a generic hard hat and a heavy wool coat. Garrity had personal custody of the leather notebook that had been stripped from Evelyn's possession, scrolling through the handwritten rows of bank account numbers, corporate shell names, and wire transfer logs that documented his personal corruption. When Evelyn, her cognitive faculties slowly recovering from the chemical restraint, looked up from the concrete floor and refused to surrender her secondary research backups, Garrity did not engage in an emotional argument. He calmly nodded to McAllister, stepped back into the shadows, and watched as his enforcers utilized a heavy, solid iron rebar stake to crush the young reporter's skull, ensuring that her voice would never echo inside a grand jury chamber. The physical disposal of the body, as orchestrated by Julian Garrity and executed by McAllister's team in the early hours of October 25, 1991, represented a masterclass in forensic concealment that successfully outsmarted the primitive investigative technologies of the late 20th century. McAllister detailed how they carried Evelyn's broken frame down into the deepest structural pits of the stadium's primary support columns, massive subterranean excavations that were scheduled to receive thousands of tons of high-density, industrial-grade liquid concrete at sunrise. The operatives wrapped her remains in a thick sheet of heavy-duty construction plastic, weighing the bundle down with standard iron reinforcement grids, and lowered it into the core of Column 42, a structural pillar designed to bear the immense weight of the stadium's eastern grandstand. When the massive concrete mixing trucks arrived at 5 a.m., the pouring process proceeded with absolute normalcy, burying the body of Evelyn Cross beneath 50 feet of solid, unyielding stone. Garrity had stood by the perimeter fence, sipping a cup of morning coffee as the heavy machinery vibrated through the earth, watching silently as the ultimate evidence of his crime was transformed into the permanent structural foundation of a landmark public building. He had built his monument on top of his victim, creating a physical configuration where the discovery of the body would require the literal demolition of a multi-million-pound sports arena, a legal and structural impossibility that he believed would protect his secret until the end of time. The recording of this confession, completed less than 3 hours before McAllister's heart flatlined, instantly bypassed the standard bureaucratic channels of the Chicago Police Department, landing directly on the desk of a specialized federal cold case task force operating under the authority of the Department of Justice in Washington. Investigators realized that they were dealing with a highly volatile, explosive legal scenario. The man accused of ordering a brutal historical execution was not a retired private citizen, but a powerful, active state senator who possessed an immense network of political informants, legal defense structures, and media handlers. If the target received the slightest inkling that McAllister had broken his silence, he could instantly utilize his vast financial resources to destroy secondary paper archives, manipulate surviving witnesses, or flee the country before a federal arrest warrant could be legally executed. A specialized surveillance detail was instantly deployed to monitor Garrity's movements in real time, tracking his digital communications, his private banking transactions, and his scheduling logs under the authority of emergency federal national security wiretaps. What the task force observed was an aging politician entirely wrapped in the absolute illusion of his own permanent invulnerability. Garrity was preparing to host a massive, televised charity gala inside the luxury ballroom of a prominent downtown hotel, an event designed to celebrate his 35 years of public service and launch his upcoming campaign for the federal congressional elections. The contrast between this pristine, aristocratic public display and the terrifying reality of the concrete column on the west side was an acute, psychological insult to the federal agents who were monitoring his conversations through encrypted audio feeds. The tactical execution of the arrest was planned with a deliberate, high-visibility precision designed to shatter the target's political insulation in front of the very cameras he had spent a lifetime manipulating. At exactly 8:45 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, as Senator Julian Garrity stood behind a crystal podium in the crowded ballroom, his face bathed in the warm glow of television lights, a dozen federal marshals and state police TAM-2, clad in dark suits and carrying official federal warrants, entered the hall from the rear service entrances. They marched down the center aisle, their faces grim, cutting through the crowd of stunned donors and media executives like a line of iron gears. The lead TAM-2 stepped onto the stage, interrupted the senator in mid-sentence, and delivered the statement that brought a permanent, historical end to his legendary career, reading the charges of first-degree murder and institutional conspiracy directly into the live microphone. The media storm that followed the live, televised arrest of Senator Julian Garrity broke across the city of Chicago like a Category 5 psychological hurricane, completely dominating every digital billboard, social media matrix, and international news broadcast within minutes of the tactical takedown. The headline ran across the country with a Don Dapp, suffocating repetition. Chicago 1991 cold case solved. Deathbed confession unmasks prominent politician. The public stood in a state of absolute Chandong paralysis. People who had voted for Garrity for decades, communities that had received his civic funding, and independent journalists who had respected his public stance against corruption were suddenly forced to confront the reality that their venerable elder statesman was a cold-blooded killer who had spent 35 years hiding a slaughter beneath the concrete of a stadium they visited every weekend. Inside the high-security federal interrogation suites at the Dirksen Federal Building, the dynamic between the fallen politician and the elite prosecution team transformed into an intense, high-stakes legal warfare. Garrity's defense counsel, an aggressive assembly of the country's most expensive corporate defense attorneys, launched an immediate, multi-layered counteroffensive designed to suppress the McAllister recording, claiming that a deathbed confession from a heavily medicated, dying octogenarian was legally unreliable, unconstitutional hearsay that could not form the basis of a first-degree murder prosecution. They argued fiercely that without physical body tracks, a verifiable weapon, or an uncorrupted crime scene, the state's case was nothing more than a historical fiction built upon the hallucinations of a dying criminal aiming to settle an old score. The prosecution team, however, had spent the 48 hours following the arrest preparing a structural and engineering operation that would completely bypass the defense's legal maneuvers, turning to a branch of science that did not exist when Evelyn Cross was silenced: non-invasive cosmic ray muon tomography. This cutting-edge imaging technology, traditionally utilized by volcanologists and aerospace engineers to scan the interior density of active volcanoes and deep archaeological monuments, measures the rate at which subatomic cosmic particles pass through dense matter. If an object possesses a uniform internal consistency, such as a solid block of high-density concrete, the muon tracking array records a completely symmetrical pattern. However, if that concrete column contains a hidden void, a cavity, or the skeletal remains of a foreign object wrapped in plastic, the cosmic particles are disrupted, creating a distinct, high-resolution, three-dimensional anomaly on the digital scanners. Under the authority of a federal search warrant, a specialized engineering crew accompanied by federal forensic archaeologists entered the West Side Stadium complex under the cover of midnight darkness, deploying a series of towering muon detection panels around the base of Column 42. For 12 hours, The sensors silently recorded the invisible rain of cosmic particles passing through the 50 feet of industrial stone, sending the data packets directly to the quantum computing arrays at the Argonne National Laboratory for real-time digital reconstruction. When the imaging file was finalized on the morning of July 14, 2026, the digital readout did not display an empty, symmetrical core of solid concrete. Instead, it revealed a distinct, high-contrast structural anomaly deep within the center of the column, a perfect, skeletal silhouette of a human body, its skull showing a massive, shattered fracture configuration that aligned flawlessly with the physical dimensions of an industrial rebar stake. Armed with this irrefutable cosmic imaging data, the prosecution secured an emergency judicial order authorizing the physical extraction of the remains from the structural spine of the arena. Working with specialized diamond-tipped core drilling rigs and delicate hydraulic extraction machinery, forensic engineers systematically cut away a 3-foot section of the column, maintaining absolute structural stabilization of the surrounding building while prying open the concrete tomb that Garrity had constructed in 1991. When the final layer of dense stone was cracked open under the glare of forensic halogen lamps, the technicians exposed a perfectly preserved time capsule of a historic execution. The heavy-duty construction plastic, the iron reinforcement grids, and the skeletal remains of Evelyn Cross. Her skull shattered from behind, but her clothing still retaining the microscopic chemical residues of the vocal paralytic McAllister's team had deployed 35 years prior. The physical recovery of Evelyn Cross's remains inside the structural spine of Column 42 completely vaporized the defense's legal strategy, transforming the impending trial into an absolute, unappealable march toward total accountability. The forensic recovery team achieved an additional, immense scientific victory when they subjected the interior folds of the construction plastic used as a shroud to an advanced process known as vacuum-assisted cyanoacrylate fuming, a technique that utilizes a vaporized polymer bonding agent to detect microscopic ridge structures left behind by touch, even after decades of immersion in an anaerobic environment. The testing pulled a single, pristine latent print from the interior adhesive edge of the plastic sheet, a print that belonged not to McAllister or his handlers, but to the private hand of Julian Garrity himself, providing the jury with a molecular signature that linked the politician directly to the physical act of body concealment. The legal proceedings at the federal district court in the autumn of 2026 became an unprecedented public demonstration of the unyielding power of temporal justice, with the prosecution utilizing large-scale digital holographic arrays to project the three-dimensional muon scans and the structural reconstructions of the execution directly into the center of the courtroom. The jury sat in a breathless, heavy silence as the state's attorneys mapped out the precise timeline of the corruption, the ambush, and the slaughter, weaving the digital evidence, the financial ledgers, and the voice of the younger, confident Alderman Garrity from 1991 into an unbreakable cage of absolute guilt. The fallen statesman sat in the defendant's dock, his expensive tailored suits unable to mask the sudden, catastrophic atrophy of his physical frame, his face remaining a pale, hollow mask of absolute psychological defeat as he realized that the concrete monument he had built to hide his sin had become the ultimate weapon used to destroy his existence. The closing argument delivered by the lead federal prosecutor was a masterpiece of narrative power that resonated deeply through the cultural consciousness of the city, framing the case not merely as a historic homicide prosecution, but as a long-deferred reclamation of the civic soul. Looking directly into the eyes of the jurors, and then pointing a finger at the slumped figure of the defendant, the prosecutor stated, Julian Garrity believed that by burying his victim beneath 50 feet of industrial stone, he had rewritten history. He believed that he could use the wealth and the power generated from that silence to purchase a seat in the highest halls of this nation. He walked through this city for 35 years, celebrated as a hero, while the bones of the woman who had died for the truth remained trapped beneath the feet of the citizens he claimed to serve. But justice is not a fragile entity that evaporates with the wind or dissolves within the concrete. It is a patient, unyielding reality that waits in the dark, utilizing the cosmic machinery of the universe to tear through the deepest stone, unmask the most powerful monsters, and demand a final, absolute accounting before the eyes of history. The jury's deliberation was a swift, crushing demonstration of total moral consensus, lasting just under 90 minutes before they returned with a unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts of first-degree federal murder, civil rights conspiracy, and institutional fraud. The announcement was met with a deep, collective silence from the crowded gallery, a profound sense of historical relief that a multi-decade wrong had finally been made right, cleansing the city's political lineage of a phantom that had poisoned its air for a generation. When the federal judge handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of a remote parole protocol, ensuring that the 82-year-old fallen icon would spend his remaining natural days within the stark, concrete confines of a maximum security federal medical penitentiary, Garrity did not speak, did not flinch, and did not look back as the marshals led him away in heavy steel chains. Though the legal file has reached its definitive finality, the psychological and cultural ripples of the 1991 Chicago cold case resolution continue to shape the architecture of public life across the state of Illinois. The West Side Stadium complex underwent a profound, solemn structural remodeling, with Column 42 permanently decommissioned from commercial branding and transformed into a grand, sun-drenched indoor memorial plaza and public research library dedicated explicitly to the memory of Evelyn Cross and the protection of investigative journalism. A massive, towering portrait of the young reporter, holding her leather notebook with a gaze of unyielding determination, looks down upon the thousands of visitors who pass through the space every week, a permanent, echoing reminder that no matter how deep the grave is dug, no matter how powerful the killer's robes, and no matter how many decades are allowed to pass, the light of truth will always find a way to break through the concrete, shatter the silence, and claim its final, absolute victory. The absolute dismantling of Senator Julian Garrity's engineered legacy did not merely result in a swift legal indictment. It exposed a secondary, vastly more terrifying network of structural protection that had functioned as an invisible, operational shield for 35 years. To comprehend the chilling mechanics of this survival protocol, one must step out of the high-tech federal courtrooms of 2026 and return to the immediate, toxic aftermath of the October night in 1991 when Evelyn Cross was erased from the grid of the loop. While the Chicago Police Department's frontline homicide detectives were breaking their careers against a complete absence of physical tracks outside the Chicago Chronicle offices, the young, hyper-ambitious Alderman Julian Garrity was already executing the second phase of a calculated, multi-decade plan designed to permanently paralyze any municipal or federal inquiry that dared to look too closely at the subterranean foundations of his rising empire. The logistical choreography of the cover-up reveals a level of cold, calculating sophistication that completely shatters the traditional profile of a localized political assassination. In 1991, the administrative architecture of Cook County was defined by fragmented data networks, analog record-keeping systems, and an extreme vulnerability to high-level insider manipulation. Garrity did not make the panicked error of attempting to destroy Evelyn's physical investigative files or launching an overt campaign to silence the independent press corps. Instead, he utilized his position as the chairman of the city's powerful budget allocation committee to initiate a subtle, systemic reorganization of the very law enforcement units tasked with investigating historic disappearances. Within 6 months of the homicide, the specific cold case team assigned to the Cross file was subjected to a sudden, politically engineered budget reduction, their physical files transferred to an off-site, unindexed storage facility under the guise of an administrative modernization program, effectively burying the investigation beneath an unyielding mountain of unchecked bureaucracy. Simultaneously, Garrity began the systematic construction of his ultimate legal and psychological firewall, his public ascension into a champion of municipal reform and investigative accountability. He understood that the safest place for a monster to hide is directly inside the light of public scrutiny, wearing the pristine robes of a civic savior. He weaponized the tragic disappearance of Evelyn Cross, utilizing his platform in City Hall to deliver emotional speeches calling for increased safety measures for journalists, establishing a private foundation in her name that offered nominal scholarships to young writers, and standing side by side with her grieving mother at annual memorial vigils. This masterclass in emotional psychopathy created an absolute, structural blind spot within the local media and the political establishment. Anyone who suggested that Julian Garrity had a connection to the corruption Evelyn was tracking was instantly met with a wave of public condemnation, branded as a cynical conspiracy theorist attacking the one politician who was actively working to keep her memory alive. The financial data recovered from the secure digital drives of Thomas McAllister's estate in 2026 shed a terrifying light on the true economic engine that drove this multi-decade deception. Garrity was not a typical city politician surviving on localized kickbacks. He was the premier, operational white-collar architect for a massive, shadow capitalist consortium that connected international concrete syndicates, corrupt steel manufacturers, and high-level union representatives across the Midwest. The West Side Stadium project was not merely a sports arena. It functioned as a multi-million-pound capital laundering laundromat, designed to absorb illicit cash derived from illegal municipal waste contracts and hidden real estate manipulation schemes. Evelyn Cross had managed to track this flow of blood-stained currency directly to a series of blind, offshore trust accounts in Luxembourg that bore the private digital signatures of Julian Garrity, a discovery that represented an existential threat to the entire political and corporate infrastructure of the state of Illinois. The digital forensics teams tasked with reconstructing this financial grid faced a monumental task, forced to execute a deep-tissue data extraction of obsolete mainframe networks that had been decommissioned before the turn of the century. Using 2026 quantum emulation arrays, analysts systematically rebuilt the deleted transaction logs of the defunct Continental Illinois Bank, tracing a continuous, hidden pipeline of structured financial distributions that occurred between 1992 and 2015. The ledgers revealed that a microscopic portion of the profits generated by the stadium development was diverted every quarter to fund an elite, private network of administrative fixers, retired police captains, and municipal record keepers. This private shadow guard was charged with a single operational objective: monitoring the internal networks of Cook County law enforcement to ensure that no ambitious young detective could ever accidentally stumble upon the original evidence boxes or reactivate the forensic testing of the Cross file. While the Financial Task Force dismantled his offshore network, forensic engineers and architectural geologists returned to the physical site of Column 42 to conduct a definitive, microenvironmental analysis of the structural tomb. Although the sports arena had been occupied by millions of spectators over 3 decades, the internal microclimate of the reinforced concrete pillar had functioned as a perfect, anaerobic time capsule. The high-density industrial cement poured over Evelyn's body in October 1991 had created a highly alkaline environment that had chemically retarded the natural process of decomposition, converting a substantial portion of her biological tissues into an adipocere matrix, a phenomenon known to forensic science as grave wax. This rare preservation allowed modern molecular biologists to extract a pristine, uncorrupted genetic canvas from the remains, providing a level of physical evidence that left the defense with absolutely no room for maneuver. Nanotechnology specialists utilizing multispectral mass spectrometers analyzed the precise chemical signatures of the industrial decontaminant trapped within the fabric of her clothing. The testing isolated specific chemical additives, including a highly restricted, vintage petroleum-based surfactant, that matched the exact compound formula of a military-grade cleaning chemical utilized exclusively by the municipal maintenance fleets under the direct operational control of Alderman Julian Garrity's committee in 1991. The physical, molecular trail was unbroken. The tool of chemical erasure had emerged directly from the killer's private administrative arsenal. The psychological toll of these expanding disclosures on the cultural consciousness of Chicago was catastrophic, precipitating a structural collapse of institutional faith that tore through neighborhood organizations, independent newsrooms, and civic councils alike. The realization that their most revered elder statesman, a politician who had received civic accolades, who had drafted the state's modern anti-corruption statutes, and who had been considered for the highest federal appointments, was an unmasked executioner who had literally walked among them with his hands drenched in blood, induced a deep sense of collective betrayal. Public squares that had been named in his honor were instantly occupied by crowds of furious citizens demanding the immediate removal of his monuments, while the city's current leadership scrambled to launch independent audits into every municipal contract, every legislative bill, and every judicial appointment that Garrity had influenced during his 35 years of absolute dominance. In response to the unprecedented nature of the institutional collapse exposed by the case, the Illinois State Senate convened an extraordinary constitutional tribunal in the summer of 2026, tasked with executing a retroactive review of Garrity's complete legislative record. The tribunal, which was broadcast live across national networks, became a grim theater of historical deconstruction, as legal scholars and public auditors exposed how Garrity had systematically engineered the state's modern public funding laws to create permanent, undetectable loopholes for the very corporate syndicates that had bankrolled his crimes. The legislation he had championed as models of progressive development were revealed to be sophisticated mechanisms of state-sanctioned corruption, proving to the public that the entirety of their modern administrative framework had been designed by a killer to protect his profit and preserve his impunity. As the physical liquidation of Garrity's multi-million-dollar personal estate approached its final stages under federal asset forfeiture mandates, the legal representatives of the Cross family achieved a historical victory that brought a profound sense of poetic justice to the memory of the victim. Under a landmark judicial decree issued by the Federal District Court, the entirety of Garrity's private assets, including his luxury downtown penthouse, his vast private wealth portfolios, and the residuals from his commercial real estate investments, were legally seized and transferred to the custody of the newly chartered Evelyn Cross Investigative Journalism Trust. The trust announced that the capital would be utilized to establish a permanent, state-of-the-art digital data archive and high-security legal defense fund, designed explicitly to protect, train, and finance independent investigative writers worldwide who are targeting institutional corruption within sovereign governance structures, ensuring that the very force Garrity had murdered to silence would be permanently revitalized, funded by the death of his own legacy. Inside the sterile, concrete confines of the maximum security medical unit at the federal penitentiary, the psychological collapse of Julian Garrity played out in complete, unyielding isolation from the material luxury that had sustained his ego for half a century. Stripped of his titles, his security details, and his expensive tailored suits, the 82-year-old inmate spent his days staring silently at the blank walls of his medical cell, his body rapidly succumbing to the advanced stages of physical atrophy. According to internal prison logbooks, he maintained a rigid, absolute refusal to communicate with the facility's psychiatric staff or the state prosecutors who offered to adjust his housing security in exchange for information regarding other unresolved historical political corruption files in Illinois. He remained entirely consumed by his own permanent, unyielding narcissism, viewing his total destruction not as a consequence of moral failure, but as a statistical anomaly, an unavoidable glitch caused by a technological future he had failed to anticipate. The ultimate legacy of the 1991 Chicago cold case resolution stands as a permanent, defining monument in the history of international criminal jurisprudence, a stark, unyielding demonstration that in the modern era of 2026, time has lost its capacity to shield the powerful. The massive stadium complex on the west side, once a symbol of civic pride and corporate dominance, has been permanently transformed, its structural identity entirely subverted by the truth. Column 42, the physical pillar that had served as an anonymous concrete tomb for 35 years, has been structurally isolated and encased within a massive column of clear, high-impact optical crystal, surrounded by a sun-drenched, public sanctuary that remains open to the citizens of Chicago 24 hours a day. The space functions not as a place of sports entertainment, but as a permanent, echoing monument to the unyielding reality of memory, a physical proof that no matter how deep the stone is poured, no matter how holy the public disguise worn by the perpetrator, the light of forensic truth will always possess the patient, devastating capacity to break through the concrete, shatter the silence, and demand a final, absolute accounting before the eyes of history. The deep tissue extraction of Senator Julian Garrity's clandestine infrastructure under the secondary phase of Operation Mirage did not merely target his political associations. It ignited an intense, high-velocity assault on the international legal and banking protocols that had systematically facilitated his survival for 35 years. By the winter of 2026, the structural narrative of the 1991 Chicago cold case shifted from a localized investigation into a rogue municipal politician to a terrifying international case study on the weaponization of early digital banking blind spots. As federal prosecutors inside the Dirksen Federal Building finalized the primary asset forfeiture filings against the former statesman, teams of international forensic economists and quantum cyber analysts were uncovering an intricate, parallel financial ecosystem, a shadow network engineered by Garrity in the mid-1990s that utilized the uncorruptible, stolen research files of Evelyn Cross as a continuous, lucrative currency to buy absolute political immunity across the United States. To truly map the architecture of this historical financial deception, the multi-agency task force had to execute an unprecedented data recovery operation on a series of ancient, encrypted magnetic storage platters recovered from an industrial-grade floor safe located beneath the mahogany floorboards of Garrity's private legislative office in Springfield, Illinois. The physical drives represented a profound technological challenge. They were custom-configured, late 20th century storage units utilizing a highly unstable, obsolete Unix-based cryptographic algorithm that had been completely abandoned by modern software engineers. To read the data tracks without triggering an automatic magnetic degaussing routine, an analog kill switch engineered to wipe the drives if they were accessed by an unauthorized hardware signature, the cyber unit constructed a specialized digital isolation chamber that simulated the precise server environment of a mid-90s commercial bank. When the ancient cryptographic matrix finally buckled under the continuous processing power of 2026 quantum decryption arrays, the true scope of Garrity's administrative corruption sent a profound shockwave through the financial regulatory landscape. The recovered files did not merely contain basic ledger sheets or records of campaign kickbacks. They revealed a systematic, digitized blueprint for an international money laundering pipeline that linked the Cook County Municipal Procurement Committees directly to private, unregulated banking cartels operating out of Zurich, Nicosia, and the Cayman Islands. Investigators uncovered highly confidential communication logs proving that the West Side Stadium development of 1991 was only the primary physical node in a multi-decade, statewide racketeering enterprise designed to systematically divert public infrastructure funds into the private offshore portfolios of a small, elite circle of Illinois administrators. The data footprint established that Evelyn Cross had been executed precisely because her financial investigative instinct had penetrated the absolute core of this international network. In her final weeks, the young reporter had managed to secure a collection of physical microfiche records containing the unredacted wire transfer routings that documented the flow of stolen public cash from the city's Transit Expansion Fund into a series of blind, numbered accounts held at the Euro-Atlantic Credit Bank in Luxembourg. Accounts that were directly controlled by Julian Garrity under a series of corporate shell aliases. The leather notebook that Garrity had stripped from her slumping frame inside the utility van contained the specific, unencrypted access codes that would have dismantled his financial empire within a matter of days, rendering his subsequent first-degree murder charge not an act of spontaneous rage, but a cold, administrative liquidation executed to preserve the structural integrity of a multi-million-dollar corporate conspiracy. The forensic reconstruction of how Garrity utilized these stolen files during the subsequent decades exposed the chilling, psychopathic adaptability of his mind. He did not leave the data buried in the dark archives of his safe. Instead, he used the specific corporate names, account numbers, and blackmail assets he had recovered from Evelyn's files to systematically compromise his political rivals and enforce absolute discipline within his own party. For 35 years, whenever an ambitious young prosecutor or an independent oversight committee threatened to launch a structural audit into his legislative funding programs, Garrity would quietly leverage the hidden financial records, deploying anonymous leaks and targeted corporate investigations to destroy the credibility of his opponents before they could ever establish an official inquiry. He had transformed his victims' final, desperate research into the ultimate tool of personal and institutional insulation, converting a historic act of violence into a permanent mechanism of absolute political dominance. While the Cyberforensics Division was unraveling this digital financial grid, a specialized team of forensic anthropologists and ballistics experts at the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office was completing a definitive, microscopic trauma analysis on the skeletal remains of Evelyn Cross. The recovery of her frame from the core of Column 42 provided modern science with an exceptionally rare opportunity to apply 2026-era advanced osteoprofiling methodologies to a 35-year-old homicide scene. Because the high-density industrial concrete had chemically sealed her remains away from the destructive effects of atmospheric oxygen and ground moisture, the microscopic structures of her bone tissue had been preserved with an extraordinary, near-pristine clarity. The trauma specialists utilized a process known as synchrotron X-ray microtomography, a high-energy particle acceleration imaging technique that maps the interior structural density of bone tissue down to a submicron scale without causing physical damage to the historic artifact. The scanning arrays focused intensely on the extensive fracture patterns running across the posterior and lateral regions of her cranium. The data generated by the synchrotron completely shattered the defense's lingering arguments that Evelyn's death could have been the result of an accidental fall or an randomized, low-velocity impact during a street-level robbery gone wrong. The three-dimensional microtomography maps proved that her skull had been subjected to at least 3 high-velocity, crushing impacts delivered with immense, calculated kinetic force from a specific, elevated angle from behind. The impact vectors demonstrated that the weapon used was a heavy, solid, angular iron object matching the exact spatial dimensions and cross-sectional density profile of an old-fashioned, 1.5-inch industrial structural rebar stake, the exact material that was scattered in massive quantities across the West Side Stadium construction site on the night of October 24, 1991. The bone density analysis also revealed microfractures on the edges of her cervical vertebrae that indicated a severe, post-mortem manipulation of her neck, confirming McAllister's deathbed statement that the operatives had violently broken her neck to ensure absolute cessation of life before her body was lowered into the deep concrete foundation pit. Simultaneously, the Chemical Analysis Division achieved an additional, definitive breakthrough by analyzing the microscopic soil and mineral residue recovered from the deep folds of the construction plastic used to encase the remains. Using an advanced forensic science technique known as isotopic ratio mass spectrometry, geochemists mapped the specific atomic variations of oxygen, carbon, and strontium trapped within the hardened concrete matrix that had formed an immediate shell around the shroud. The isotopic profile returned from the laboratory provided an undeniable, local geological signature that matched a single, highly specific batch run of industrial aggregate produced by the Calumet River batching plant at exactly 3:45 a.m. on October 25, 1991. This specific batch of high-density cement had been ordered under an emergency municipal contract authorized by Alderman Julian Garrity's office less than 12 hours prior to the murder, ostensibly to repair a localized structural failure in an unrelated public bridge project on the city's south side. The delivery logs, which had been digitized from paper archives under Operation Mirage, proved that the concrete mixing trucks had been systematically diverted from their official municipal route by an explicit, encrypted radio command originating from McAllister's communication base, moving directly to the West Side Stadium site to seal Column 42 before the arrival of the daytime Union construction crews. The science had woven an airtight, molecular net around the fallen senator, linking the physical mechanics of the burial directly to his private administrative signatures. The cultural and societal shockwaves generated by these expanding forensic and financial disclosures induced a deep, systemic paralysis within the political infrastructure of the state of Illinois. The public realization that their modern legislative framework, including the state's primary anti-money laundering codes and independent transparency statutes, had been written and championed by a man who was actively managing an international corporate murder conspiracy, created an unprecedented crisis of institutional legitimacy. The local independent press corps, deeply traumatized by the historical erasure of their colleague, launched an aggressive, coordinated campaign to expose the long-term, structural compliance of the city's media establishment. publishing extensive retroactive analysis demonstrating how major newspapers had willingly accepted the City Hall press releases of the 90s that sought to minimize Evelyn's work and frame her disappearance as a personal lifestyle flight. In direct response to the massive, daily public protests that paralyzed the downtown streets of Chicago throughout the autumn of 2026, the governor of Illinois signed an extraordinary executive directive creating the Special Commission on Historical Institutional Accountability. This independent judicial body was granted absolute subpoena power and armed with 2026 forensic analytics toolkits, charged with executing a total, uncompromising review of every unresolved missing person and homicide file involving local journalists, labor organizers, and anti-corruption activists dating back to 1970. The goal was to systematically dismantle the remaining legacy structures of high-level protection that had allowed elite offenders to utilize the complex bureaucracy of Cook County as a permanent sanctuary from the law. As the physical liquidation of Garrity's multi-million-dollar estate entered its final stages under federal asset forfeiture judgments, the Evelyn Cross Investigative Journalism Trust announced the formal launch of its global operations from its newly inaugurated headquarters in the Loop. The facility, which was funded entirely by the liquidation of the former senator's luxury real estate portfolios and hidden offshore accounts, was designed to function as a high-security digital sanctuary for independent writers operating within hostile political environments worldwide. The trust established a permanent, global satellite communication network and an advanced encrypted data vault infrastructure, ensuring that whenever a modern investigative journalist uncovers high-level institutional corruption, their raw research data can be instantly mirrored across multiple international jurisdictions, preventing any single sovereign authority or corrupt corporate syndicate from ever again executing a permanent, silent erasure of the truth. Inside the sterile, concrete dimensions of the maximum security medical cell at the Federal Penitentiary in Rochester, Minnesota, the physical frame of Julian Garrity was undergoing a rapid, unyielding breakdown that mirrored the absolute destruction of his historical legacy. The 82-year-old former icon spent his days in total sensory isolation, confined to a hospital bed as his internal organs succumbed to the advanced stages of systemic vascular disease. According to confidential internal medical logs leaked to legal journals, Garrity's psychological state had completely devolved into a catatonic condition of narcissistic withdrawal. He refused to turn his head toward the guards, ignored the legal briefs submitted by his public defenders, and spent hours staring blankly at the automated biometric monitoring screens that tracked his failing heartbeat. The man who had commanded the attention of millions, who had manipulated the laws of a state, and who had built an empire on top of an unmarked grave was now nothing more than an anonymous number in a federal database, a body waiting for its natural expiration inside a cage of high-tech temporal justice. The definitive resolution of the 1991 Chicago cold case stands as a permanent, epical landmark in the history of international criminal justice, a final, unyielding proof that in the modern era of 2026, the passage of time has lost its capacity to preserve the impunity of the elite. The massive stadium complex on the west side has since been completely decommissioned from active commercial sporting events, its structural destiny forever subverted by the power of forensic memory. The entire eastern grandstand, centered around the clear crystal monolith enclosing column 42, has been transformed into a grand, state-of-the-art public educational center and memorial plaza that remains open to the public 24 hours a day. Near the high-impact glass wall that allows visitors to look directly into the structural core where Evelyn Cross lay hidden for 35 years, a permanent digital interactive archive projects her original, unreleased research papers, her field notes, and her articles into the open air. The space serves as an enduring, resonant warning to every politician, corporate executive, and institutional broker who believes they can hide their crimes beneath the physical foundations of our society, a permanent monument to the unyielding reality that no matter how deep the concrete is poured, no matter how clean the robes of the perpetrator, the light of science and the voice of justice will always find a way to break through the stone, tear down the lies, and demand a final, inescapable accounting before the eyes of history. The architectural deconstruction of Julian Garrity's hidden fortress did not merely strip him of his physical assets, It unraveled the deep tissue legal protection systems that had systematically insulated him from the consequences of his actions for over 3 decades. By the late winter of 2026, as the multi-agency task force finalized the structural analysis of Column 42, the federal prosecution team inside the Dirksen Federal Building encountered a secondary, highly sophisticated legal counteroffensive mounted by the remnants of Garrity's political network. This was not a standard challenge to the reliability of a deathbed confession. It was a scorched-earth constitutional assault designed to exploit the temporal limits of the American judicial framework, attempting to turn the physical passage of 35 years into an absolute, unbreachable legal barrier against retroactive accountability. The legal battleground materialized inside the sterile, high-security chambers of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, where Garrity's newly assigned public defense coalition filed a massive, multi-layered motion to dismiss the entire indictment on the grounds of severe pre-indictment delay and due process violations. The defense argued with immense rhetorical force that the prosecution's reliance on 2026-era subatomic imaging and nanotechnology constituted an unfair, retroactive modification of the rules of evidence. They posited that because the original 1991 investigative team had failed to secure the physical crime scene, identify the primary witnesses before their natural deaths, or preserve the integrity of the surrounding urban grid, any modern reconstruction of the homicide was a simulated, algorithmic fiction that lacked the foundational certainty required for a first-degree murder conviction. The state's counterstrategy, engineered by an elite division of federal civil rights attorneys and forensic legal scholars, was built upon an unyielding, comprehensive documentation of intentional institutional obstruction. To establish that the 35-year delay was not the result of investigative negligence, but the direct consequence of a continuous, politically mandated conspiracy of silence, prosecutors introduced a series of highly confidential, digitized administrative manifests recovered from the secure database partitions of the defunct Cook County Records Bureau. These documents, which had been systematically hidden inside routine municipal transit archiving files under Operation Mirage, proved that between 1992 and 2008, Julian Garrity had personally authorized a sequence of extraordinary, off-the-ledger financial appropriations to fund the total, physical isolation of the original 1991 Chicago Chronicle case files. The administrative trail revealed that whenever a junior detective within the Homicide Division filed a formal request to apply updated forensic methodologies to the unresolved Evelyn Cross file, the request was automatically intercepted by a high-ranking police administrator who functioned as a paid operative within Garrity's shadow network. The detective would be instantly reassigned to a remote sub-precinct, the physical evidence box transferred to an unindexed, climate-controlled maritime storage vault in the outer shipping docks, and the digital log entry deleted from the active municipal server matrix. This was the ultimate, systemic proof of active concealment. The defense could no longer argue that time had naturally degraded the case, because the state had demonstrated that the passage of time had been weaponized by the defendant himself to manufacture his own permanent immunity. While the legal battle over the preservation of the archives raged inside the courtroom, the forensic anthropology team at the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office was achieving a monumental breakthrough by executing a microscopic cellular extraction from the deep tissue structures of Evelyn Cross's remains. Because the high-density alkaline concrete of Column 42 had chemically petrified the biological tissues, creating an airtight, anaerobic encasement that completely shielded the body from atmospheric decay, molecular biologists were able to access a pristine cellular canvas that had remained uncompromised since October 1991. The scientists utilized a cutting-edge forensic technique known as localized laser capture microdissection, a process that uses a high-precision, computerized ultraviolet laser to isolate individual target cells from a complex tissue matrix without causing physical disruption to the surrounding historical structures. The extraction focused intensely on the microscopic fluid cavities located within the deep interior canals of her petrified auditory nerves. The objective was to isolate and amplify any residual molecules of the chemical restraint that Thomas McAllister's team had deployed during the initial downtown ambush. The data returned from the laboratory was a definitive, multi-layered forensic catastrophe for the defense. The mass spectrometry analysis isolated a massive concentration of an obsolete, highly restricted synthetic neurotoxin, a specialized, fast-acting vocal paralytic that had been engineered exclusively for military intelligence applications during the late Cold War era. The specific chemical configuration of the toxin contained an identical batch purity signature that matched a secret shipment of tactical chemical decontaminants and experimental non-lethal weapons that had been delivered to the private logistics garage of the Chicago Department of Streets and Sanitation in September 1991. The delivery logs, which had been recovered from a rusted filing cabinet in a decommissioned municipal warehouse under Operation Mirage, bore the personal, unredacted authorization signature of Alderman Julian Garrity. He had utilized his absolute control over the city's emergency procurement committees to divert military-grade chemical restraints into his private enforcement arsenal, providing his tactical team with the precise physical tools required to execute a silent, mid-city abduction without triggering the attention of late-night office workers or passing patrol units. The molecular trail was absolute. The instrument of physical suppression was linked directly to the killer's private administrative desk. Simultaneously, the Digital Forensics Division of Task Force Mirage was executing a deep tissue data recovery operation on the secure personal computer network that Garrity had maintained inside his private legislative office in Springfield. Although the former senator had utilized an expensive commercial software suite to systematically purge his digital communications files every week, technicians utilized an advanced electronic waveform reconstruction methodology that scans the physical, residual magnetic strata of old hard drive platters down to a subatomic scale. This process, which reads the minute structural distortions left behind on the metallic surface whenever data is written or erased, allowed analysts to systematically reconstruct a series of long-deleted, deeply encrypted personal emails from the winter of 1991. The recovered correspondence was between Garrity and a high-level executive within the corporate development syndicate that had constructed the West Side Stadium complex. The emails, written in a cold, analytical tone that stripped away any illusion of civic dedication, detailed the precise economic trade-offs of the homicide. Garrity had explicitly informed his corporate donor that the investigative journalist had secured the complete, unredacted wire transfer routings linking their shadow infrastructure to offshore accounts in Switzerland, stating in an email dated October 22, 1991, "The Cross Girl has the complete ledger. If those files reach the federal grand jury, the stadium project collapses, the funding lines are cut, and we all face institutional liquidation. The threat must be neutralized before the morning print run on Friday. Column 42 is scheduled for the primary concrete pour at dawn. Ensure the site is clear of union inspectors after midnight." The discovery of this direct, written synchronization of the murder completely dismantled the defense's narrative of localized, third-party autonomy. Garrity could no longer claim that Thomas McAllister had acted on his own initiative or that the enforcement team had exceeded their operational mandate. The emails documented a calculated, corporate execution plan with absolute premeditation, a cold-blooded administrative transaction where a human life was systematically traded for the financial security of a multi-million-pound construction project, transforming the legendary elder statesman into an unmasked white-collar executioner who had personally engineered the permanent burial of the truth. The public exposure of these explicit, cold-blooded communications induced a secondary wave of acute moral trauma within the civic and cultural institutions of Chicago, precipitating a total, structural collapse of municipal pride. The realization that a prominent stadium, a space where millions of families had gathered for generations to celebrate major athletic milestones, had been intentionally utilized as a functional execution chamber and an anonymous tomb with the full compliance of the city's political leadership created a profound crisis of collective identity. Crowds of furious citizens, labor organizers, and independent student groups launched massive, ongoing demonstrations outside City Hall, demanding the immediate dissolution of the current municipal council and a total, retroactive auditing of every public infrastructure asset constructed in Illinois since the late 20th century. The response from the federal judicial system was swift, uncompromising, and designed to eliminate any possibility of political manipulation or procedural evasion. The presiding district court judge denied every motion to dismiss submitted by the defense, ruling that the evidence of systematic government obstruction presented by the prosecution completely waived any standard statutory limitations or delay claims. The court ordered that the trial proceed immediately under maximum security conditions, transforming the historic federal courthouse into an unyielding theater of modern temporal justice. Inside the courtroom, as the formal prosecution case commenced in the late spring of 2026, the state's attorneys utilized an array of advanced digital projection technologies to present their evidence with a devastating, cinematic clarity. The jury sat in a breathless, heavy silence as a three-dimensional holographic matrix recreated the precise, internal dimensions of column 42, demonstrating with mathematical certainty how the skeletal remains of Evelyn Cross had been positioned within the iron reinforcement grids to maximize the speed of the concrete concealment. The digital simulation mapped the trajectory of the structural rebar impacts to her skull, forcing the jurors to look upon the raw, physical reality of the violence that had been hidden beneath the stadium grandstand for 35 years. Julian Garrity sat in the glass-enclosed defendant's dock, his appearance completely stripped of the majestic, silver-haired authority that had characterized his public image for decades. By order of the federal marshals, he was required to appear without the benefit of his private wardrobe, dressed in the standard, utilitarian uniform of the Federal Corrections Service, his fragile frame slouching into a wheelchair as his internal organs succumbed to the advanced stages of degenerative vascular disease. Yet, despite the total destruction of his social and physical insulation, his face remained a pale mask of absolute, unyielding narcissistic detachment. He watched the holographic reconstructions of his victim's fractured skull with a cold, analytical deadness, his fingers tapping softly on the armrest of his chair, as if he were simply evaluating a routine legislative report rather than a defining document of his own monstrous guilt. The defense team, completely stripped of any scientific or material evidence to challenge the deep-layer DNA extractions or the recovered email manifests, resorted to a desperate, psychological strategy aimed at creating a sliver of reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors regarding the target's current cognitive capacity. They called a series of specialized neurological experts who testified that the 82-year-old former senator was suffering from early-stage vascular dementia, claiming that his current mental state rendered him incapable of comprehending the historical context of the charges or assisting in his own legal defense. The defense attempted to frame the trial as a cruel, retroactive persecution of an elderly, failing man who could no longer connect his current consciousness to the actions of the young alderman in 1991. This psychological maneuver was completely vaporized when the prosecution initiated their cross-examination, introducing a series of private, highly analytical audio recordings that Garrity had secretly made using an encrypted digital dictation system in his Springfield office as recently as late 2025. These audio files, which had been recovered during the federal raids under Operation Mirage, documented that the politician's cognitive faculties were entirely uncompromised. The recordings caught Garrity delivering highly sophisticated, private evaluations of his political rivals, mapping out complex legislative manipulation strategies, and explicitly celebrating the reality that his connection to the historical disappearance of Evelyn Cross remained entirely invisible to the modern, digital surveillance infrastructure. He had not lost his memory. He had simply maintained his cognitive arrogance, using his high intellect to manage his public insulation until the very moment the federal marshals stepped onto his charity stage. The final, definitive blow to the defense's case came during the closing arguments of the trial, when the lead federal prosecutor stood before the jury box, holding up the heavy, solid iron rebar stake that had been physically extracted from the structural core of column 42. Looking directly into the eyes of the jurors, and then turning his gaze toward the slumped figure of the defendant, the prosecutor delivered a rhetorical summary that resonated through the cultural memory of the city. The defense has asked you to look at this old man in his wheelchair. They have asked you to believe that the passage of 35 years has washed away his guilt, that the fading of his memory should grant him a peaceful exit from this world. But the science before you does not lie, it does not lose its focus, and it does not allow itself to be blinded by a false cloak of vulnerability. The DNA of Evelyn Cross, trapped inside that dark concrete column for a generation, has survived to tell the story of her execution. Julian Garrity did not build a career of public service. He built a palace of absolute deception on top of the broken body of a young woman who died to expose his corruption. Today, the tools of the future have broken through his stone, and it is your solemn duty to ensure that the unyielding walls of justice finally close around the reality of his crime. The jury's deliberation was an exercise in absolute, rapid consensus, lasting just over 75 minutes before they signaled to the court officer that they had reached a unanimous verdict on all counts of first-degree federal murder, civil rights conspiracy, and institutional racketeering. As the foreperson stood to read the decision, a profound, breathless hush descended upon the crowded courtroom, a collective holding of the city's breath that had been deferred since that freezing winter night in 1991. The announcement of the word guilty sent a physical, emotional vibration through the gallery, a definitive, echoing snap that instantly brought a permanent, historical end to the engineered legacy of Julian Garrity. When the federal judge pronounced the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of a remote parole protocol, ensuring that the former senator would spend his remaining natural days within the stark, concrete confines of a maximum security federal medical penitentiary, Garrity did not flinch, did not speak, and did not look back. He was slowly wheeled out through the rear security doors of the courtroom, his path mirroring the dark, silent service exits he had used to flee the West Side Stadium construction site 35 years prior. The ultimate legacy of the 1991 Chicago cold case stands as a permanent, defining monument in the history of international criminal jurisprudence, a stark, unyielding proof that in the modern era of 2026, time has lost its capacity to protect the powerful, and that no matter how deep the stone is poured, no matter how holy the public disguise worn by the perpetrator, the light of forensic truth will always possess the patient, devastating capacity to tear through the concrete, shatter the silence, and demand a final, absolute accounting before the eyes of history. The echoes of the legal condemnation handed down in the Northern District of Illinois did not signal a quiet conclusion to the narrative of the 1991 Chicago cold case. Instead, they catalyzed an aggressive, global financial and administrative asset liquidation operation that, by the summer of 2026, began to systematically tear apart the international corporate structures that had bankrolled Julian Garrity's 35-year run of absolute impunity. As the steel doors of the Federal Medical Penitentiary in Rochester, Minnesota, permanently locked out the former state senator, a specialized multi-agency division consisting of the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Unit, federal asset forfeiture marshals, and international white-collar cyber analysts initiated the secondary phase of Operation Mirage. This was an unprecedented, forensic cross-border raid designed to trace, freeze, and seize the invisible, parallel financial grid that Garrity had meticulously engineered to convert the blood-stained proceeds of his historical corruption into a self-sustaining engine of personal and political insulation. The digital archaeology required to reconstruct this shadow corporate network pushed the boundaries of modern cryptographic data recovery to their absolute limits. Investigators focused their operational energy on a highly fortified, cold storage legacy server chassis that had been recovered from a climate-controlled, concrete-reinforced vault concealed beneath the floorboards of Garrity's private family cabin near Galena, Illinois. The physical device was an obsolete, custom-engineered hardware stack dating back to the late 1990s, utilizing a localized, multi-layered encryption algorithm that had been specifically written by a black market software syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe to shield offshore accounts from early federal automated financial dragnets. To extract the data tracks without triggering an embedded, analog thermal kill switch designed to permanently degauss the internal magnetic tape drives if an unauthorized hardware signature was detected, the Federal Cyber Unit constructed a specialized digital isolation chamber, systematically emulating the precise network architecture of the late 20th century banking mainframes. When the ancient cryptographic matrix finally collapsed under the continuous processing power of 2026 quantum decryption arrays, the true scope of Garrity's transnational financial autonomy sent shockwaves through global economic regulatory bodies. The recovered databases did not merely contain basic ledger sheets or records of historical campaign kickbacks. They revealed a systematic, digitized blueprint for an international money laundering pipeline that linked the Cook County Municipal Procurement Committees directly to unregulated private banking cartels operating out of Luxembourg, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. Investigators uncovered a series of structural, highly confidential communication logs proving that the West Side Stadium project of 1991 was only the primary physical node in a multi-decade, statewide racketeering enterprise designed to systematically divert public infrastructure funds into the private offshore portfolios of a small, elite circle of Illinois administrators. The financial data proved that Garrity was not an isolated municipal corrupt official surviving on localized bribes. He was a premier, operational white-collar architect who moved millions of dollars through the blind spots of the global capitalist machine while wearing a mask of unyielding civic dedication. The records detailed that between 1995 and 2022, Garrity had utilized a labyrinth of corporate shell names and blind trusts to act as an anonymous venture capitalist, quietly investing his illicit pharmaceutical and construction wealth into high-end real estate developments across the Midwest and private commercial technology startups in California. He had transformed his crime into a self-sustaining corporate empire, managing his identity like an elite offshore asset, completely insulated from the municipal law enforcement networks of Cook County by a fortress of high-priced corporate defense attorneys, pristine fraudulent credentials, and an absolute control over his digital footprint. While the Financial Task Force dismantled his offshore network, forensic geologists and spatial engineers returned to the physical site of the 1991 crime scene, the historic South End Stadium complex, to execute a definitive, microenvironmental study of the physical premises. Though the stadium had been occupied by millions of spectators over 3 decades, modern non-invasive laser scanning equipment allowed architectural forensic teams to map the interior structure down to a microscopic scale. They discovered that the high-density industrial cement poured over Evelyn Cross's body in October 1991 had created a highly alkaline, anaerobic microclimate that had chemically retarded the natural process of decomposition, converting a substantial portion of her biological tissues into an adipocere matrix, a phenomenon known to forensic science as grave wax. Using a newly developed methodology known as vacuum-assisted mass spectrometry extraction, forensic technicians isolated these trapped biological molecules, separating the chemical elements of the industrial decontaminant from the underlying organic matter. The testing produced a flawless, chronological timeline of the cleanup operation that had occurred during the 1991 blizzard. The chemical signatures of the cleaner contained a distinct, localized mineral density profile that matched a specific production run from a Massachusetts industrial supply warehouse that had been delivered exclusively to the municipal maintenance fleets under the direct operational control of Alderman Julian Garrity's committee 3 days before the murder. This physical, molecular trail was unbroken. The tool of chemical erasure had emerged directly from the killer's private administrative arsenal, completely neutralizing the defense's lingering arguments regarding external third-party contamination. The psychological fallout of these expanding disclosures on the cultural consciousness of Chicago was catastrophic, precipitating a structural collapse of institutional faith that tore through neighborhood organizations, independent newsrooms, and civic councils alike. The realization that their most revered elder statesman, a politician who had received civic accolades, who had drafted the state's modern anti-corruption statutes, and who had been considered for the highest federal appointments, was an unmasked executioner who had literally walked among them with his hands drenched in blood, induced a deep sense of collective betrayal. Public squares that had been named in his honor were instantly occupied by crowds of furious citizens demanding the immediate removal of his monuments, while the city's current leadership scrambled to launch independent audits into every municipal contract, every legislative bill, and every judicial appointment that Garrity had influenced during his 35 years of absolute dominance. In direct response to the unprecedented regulatory failures exposed by the case, the United States Congress convened an extraordinary select committee inquiry in the spring of 2026, tasked with drafting sweeping federal legislation to revolutionize the monitoring of historic charity trusts, high-level corporate identity validation, and public infrastructure auditing. The resulting legislation, officially designated as the Evelyn Cross Accountability and Transparency Act, stripped individuals holding high-level municipal, legal, or legislative positions of their historic exemptions from automated federal biometric cross-matching protocols. The law mandated that any infrastructure development project operating within fields of high-stakes public funding must undergo a continuous, real-time forensic validation framework, ensuring that no individual could ever again utilize corporate shell registries to hide a violent past or liquidate public assets within the American market. As the physical liquidation of Garrity's multi-million-dollar personal estate approached its final stages under federal asset forfeiture mandates, the legal representatives of the Cross family achieved a historical victory that brought a profound sense of poetic justice to the memory of the victim. Under a landmark judicial decree issued by the Federal District Court, the entirety of Garrity's private assets, including his luxury downtown penthouse, his vast private wealth portfolios, and the residuals from his commercial real estate investments, were legally seized and transferred to the custody of the newly chartered Evelyn Cross Investigative Journalism Trust. The trust announced that the capital would be utilized to establish a permanent, state-of-the-art digital data archive and high-security legal defense fund, designed explicitly to protect, train, and finance independent investigative writers worldwide who are targeting institutional corruption within sovereign governance structures, ensuring that the very force Garrity had murdered to silence would be permanently revitalized, funded by the death of his own legacy. Inside the sterile, concrete confines of the maximum security medical unit at the Federal Penitentiary in Rochester, Minnesota, the psychological collapse of Julian Garrity played out in complete, unyielding isolation from the material luxury that had sustained his ego for half a century. Stripped of his titles, his security details, and his expensive tailored suits, the 82-year-old inmate spent his days staring silently at the blank walls of his medical cell, his body rapidly succumbing to the advanced stages of physical atrophy. According to internal prison logbooks, he maintained a rigid, absolute refusal to communicate with the facility's psychiatric staff or the state prosecutors who offered to adjust his housing security in exchange for information regarding other unresolved historical political corruption files in Illinois. He remained entirely consumed by his own permanent, unyielding narcissism, viewing his total destruction not as a consequence of moral failure, but as a statistical anomaly, an unavoidable glitch caused by a technological future he had failed to anticipate. The ultimate legacy of the 1991 Chicago cold case resolution stands as a permanent, defining monument in the history of international criminal jurisprudence, a stark, unyielding demonstration that in the modern era of 2026, time has lost its capacity to shield the powerful. The massive stadium complex on the west side, once a symbol of civic pride and corporate dominance, has been permanently transformed, its structural identity entirely subverted by the truth. Column 42, the physical pillar that had served as an anonymous concrete tomb for 35 years, has been structurally isolated and encased within a massive column of clear, high-impact optical crystal, surrounded by a sun-drenched, public sanctuary that remains open to the citizens of Chicago 24 hours a day. The space functions not as a place of sports entertainment, but as a permanent, echoing monument to the unyielding reality of memory, a physical proof that no matter how deep the stone is poured, no matter how clean the robes of the perpetrator, the light of forensic truth will always possess the patient, devastating capacity to break through the concrete, shatter the silence, and demand a final, absolute accounting before the eyes of history. The global administrative shakeup triggered by the final asset forfeiture filings under Operation Mirage did not reach its peak until the late autumn of 2026, when international compliance investigators uncovered a secondary, deeply institutionalized network of data suppression that crossed between corporate entities and municipal enforcement registries. The collapse of Julian Garrity's legal and political defenses had revealed a foundational truth to the modern judicial landscape. The passage of time does not naturally dissolve physical or digital tracks. Rather, the tracks are deliberately, systematically erased by high-functioning actors who utilize the structural architecture of the state to preserve their own personal impunity. Task Force Mirage, now operating with an expanded mandate from the Federal Department of Justice, found itself looking beyond the immediate physical mechanics of Column 42, diving into a 35-year history of targeted information quarantine that had kept the file of Evelyn Cross dead inside the archives while her killer ascended to the pinnacle of state power. To execute this granular forensic deconstruction of institutional complicity, cyber analysts established a high-velocity data retrieval framework within the secure mainframes of the Illinois State Archives Division in Springfield. This was not a standard search through paper ledgers or digitized index cards. It was a multi-layered extraction of deep storage magnetic tape backups that had been decommissioned and transferred to climate-controlled, concrete-reinforced subterranean storage facilities in the early 2010s. Investigators utilized advanced 2026 quantum data carving arrays to scan the physical, unindexed sectors of these vintage storage tapes, seeking microscopic footprints of programmatic data deletion, specifically targeting any administrative commands executed between 1992 and 2005 that contained the keyword parameters matching the original homicide file reference numbers. The results recovered from this deep-tissue digital extraction exposed an unyielding, cold-blooded chronicle of bureaucratic manipulation that completely shocked the regional judicial oversight committees. The data did not reveal a pattern of simple administrative oversight or standard case stagnation. Instead, it documented a continuous, deliberate program of systemic data sterilization. Analysts recovered a series of automated background scripts hidden deep within the legacy indexing protocols of the municipal police records mainframe that had been programmed to run at midnight on the first Tuesday of every fiscal quarter. These hidden scripts had a single, highly specific operational directive to systematically alter the digital timestamps, the investigator assignment fields, and the witness index logs associated with the Evelyn Cross disappearance, transferring the file to a rotating series of fictitious, unassigned investigator badges. The timeline established by the digital forensics team proved that this automated data quarantine had been engineered in late 1993, mere months after Julian Garrity had been appointed to the state Senate's high-level Committee on Public Safety Infrastructure Appropriations. Garrity had utilized his immense legislative leverage over the municipal law enforcement budget to quietly insert a rogue software consultant into the city's data systems modernization project, an individual whose private compensation had been tracked back to a network of offshore shell companies in the Bahamas that were directly funded by the Calumet River Construction Syndicate. This was the definitive, systemic architecture of protection. The killer had not simply hidden a body in a concrete column. He had built an automated, invisible digital janitor inside the state's primary law enforcement mainframe, ensuring that whenever a new generation of ambitious homicide detectives attempted to run a routine query on the old file, the system would automatically route their search into a digital dead end. While the Cyberforensics Division was dismantling this internal software matrix, forensic historians and structural engineers returned to the physical site of the West Side Stadium complex to complete an exhaustive, chronological reconstruction of the building's maintenance logs. Under the authority of federal structural search warrants, investigators seized 35 years of computerized environmental telemetry data from the stadium's automated climate control and foundation monitoring infrastructure. This infrastructure utilized thousands of embedded microsensors designed to record minute variations in pressure, structural load, and concrete density across the building's primary support columns, sending the real-time data packets to a centralized engineering database to ensure long-term structural integrity. The technical team subjected these historical telemetry archives to an advanced anomaly detection model, analyzing the precise baseline load readings of column 42 during the 3 decades following the 1991 pour. The data revealed a highly anomalous, localized density adjustment that occurred between June and August of 1996, exactly 5 years after the murder, a timeline that aligned perfectly with a major, unpublicized structural reinforcement project that Garrity had personally financed through a private, unindexed corporate donation to the stadium's Sports Management Corporation. The engineering reports from that era had officially classified the work as a routine stabilization modification to address localized foundation settling caused by shifting groundwater levels along the industrial corridor. The 2026 forensic analysis, however, exposed a vastly more sinister reality. The subatomic mapping arrays demonstrated that the 1996 project was not a stabilization modification. It was a preemptive, industrial-grade fortification operation designed to address the physical degradation of the original concrete shell caused by the chemical decomposition of the remains inside. Garrity had utilized a specialized, high-density epoxy injection methodology, forcing tons of specialized, moisture-impermeable structural polymers deep into the core of Column 42 through a series of micro-drilled access ports hidden behind the stadium's lower-level utility corridors. This injection had effectively encased the original plastic-wrapped burial bundle within a secondary, completely airtight chemical capsule, stopping the migration of structural gases and preventing any external moisture from compromising the mineral shell that had formed around the remains, securing his secret for another 20 years behind a wall of high-performance construction materials. The public disclosure of this multi-layered, industrial-grade concealment operation induced an acute, secondary wave of cultural trauma across the metropolitan landscape of Chicago, transforming the physical structure of the West Side Stadium from a landmark arena into an active monument of institutional sociopathy. Independent journalist cooperatives and student-led transparency organizations launched a series of high-visibility public demonstrations, occupying the main commercial concourses of the stadium and demanding the immediate, total removal of every corporate brand name and political endorsement associated with the building's history. The public was forced to confront the reality that for 3 decades, their primary cultural and athletic celebrations had been intentionally hosted within an environment that had been structurally modified by a killer to preserve his own political insulation, turning a space of mass entertainment into a functional laboratory for elite crime preservation. In direct response to the expanding civil disruptions that paralyzed the commercial districts of the city throughout the winter of 2026, the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Capital Development Board issued a joint emergency directive creating the State Infrastructure Forensics Bureau. This independent technical commission was granted unrestricted access to the complete architectural plans, concrete core samples, and procurement manifests of every major public building, bridge, and highway system constructed across the state under Julian Garrity's legislative tenure. The Bureau was armed with advanced cosmic ray muon tomography rigs and vacuum-assisted mass spectrometers, charged with executing a total, systematic verification of the state's physical foundations, ensuring that the structural matrix of Illinois would be permanently cleansed of any secondary hidden anomalies or unmarked corporate graves. As the physical liquidation of Garrity's global asset network under Operation Mirage entered its final, definitive stages, the legal representatives of the Evelyn Cross Investigative Journalism Trust finalized the acquisition of the former senator's historical family country estate in Galena. The trust announced that the multi-million-pound property, which had functioned for decades as a private sanctuary for the region's elite political power brokers and a hidden repository for his parallel financial archives, would be completely transformed into a high-security, open-access international digital research facility. The new institution was explicitly designed to function as a permanent, sovereign data haven for independent investigative writers, data scientists, and forensic archaeologists worldwide who are actively working to expose structural corruption and institutional data suppression within sovereign governance entities. Inside the stark, clinical isolation of the high-security medical wing at the federal penitentiary, the psychological state of Julian Garrity continued its rapid, unyielding devolution into total catatonic withdrawal. Stripped of the sprawling material luxury of his downtown penthouse and the protective armor of his legislative status, the 82-year-old inmate spent his remaining natural hours confined to a heavy hospital bed, his eyes remaining fixed on the sterile white ceiling as his internal biological functions were systematically maintained by automated biometric life support arrays. According to internal prison intelligence summaries leaked to legal journals, Garrity never requested access to a television or a radio, never asked for updates regarding the ongoing liquidation of his multi-million-pound estate, and consistently refused to acknowledge the presence of the medical staff or the legal advisors who attempted to brief him on his appellate status. He remained entirely locked within the prison of his own permanent, absolute narcissism, treating his total exposure not as a consequence of systemic moral corruption, but as a technical miscalculation, an unavoidable collision with a technological future he had failed to anticipate. The definitive resolution of the 1991 Chicago cold case stands as a permanent, epical watershed in the history of international criminal justice, a final, unyielding proof that in the modern era of 2026, the passage of time has permanently lost its capacity to preserve the impunity of elite offenders. The massive stadium complex on the west side, once a roaring temple of corporate sports entertainment and political prestige, has been permanently transformed, its structural purpose completely subverted by the power of forensic truth. Column 42, the physical pillar that had functioned as an anonymous concrete tomb for 35 years, remains encased within its towering monolith of clear, high-impact optical crystal, a brilliant architectural scar running through the center of a newly inaugurated public sanctuary that remains open to the citizens of Chicago 24 hours a day. Near the high-impact glass interface that allows visitors to look directly into the structural core where Evelyn Cross was silenced, a permanent digital projection system continuously casts her original, unreleased investigative print layouts and her raw research notes across the open concrete surfaces of the room. The space functions not as a place of athletic amusement, but as a permanent, echoing monument to the unyielding reality of memory, a physical demonstration to every corporate executive, political broker, and administrative operative that no matter how deep the stone is poured, no matter how clean the public disguise worn by the perpetrator, the march of technological progress and the light of science will always possess the patient, devastating capacity to break through the concrete, shatter the silence, and demand a final, inescapable accounting before the eyes of history.